We don't get involved in any big pots for several hours. Everyone started drinking a while ago. I wasn't planning on having much, but the group kept getting rounds of tequila shots. With these private games, particularly as part owner of the club, I want to contribute to the fun, even though it's beginning to hit me. It's almost 1 a.m. I'm just so tired of losing after a rough summer. In the previous episode, I stayed late and climbed back from a 5-figure deficit at 2 different points to book a win. The conditions are worse at the moment to attempt to do the same tonight. It's down to 4-handed with 2 of San Antonio's best players. I've added on for $7,000, then borrowed another $10,000, so I'm in for $45,000 total, with $24,000 in front of us. By the way, what I've done today isn't something that I'd recommend for anyone. At this point, the vlog is becoming a lesson on what not to do, but here I am stuck and pushing it to the limit. We pick up King Jack offsuit after straddling to 50 in the cutoff. The big blind limps in. It's Yu-Chan. We probably have the best hand. I raised to 200. There's a ton of 3 and 4 betting happening in this game. It's just non-stop aggression. The big blind re-raises to 900. I raised initially for value. I'm okay playing a big pot in position with Broadway cards. I call for 700 more. We're heads up. The flop comes Ace Jack 4 with 2 hearts. We've got middle pair and a backdoor straight draw. It's tough to know if it's best or not after the big blind 3-bet. He down bets here to 800. Pairs are hard to come by. I call to see the turn. The dealer puts out the 10 of spades. We pick up the Broadway draw. The big blind slows down and checks. We should purely check back with intentions of getting to showdown with second pair, but I'm not doing that. I bet 2200. It accomplishes very little except in the instances we're up against top pair. It sets us up to bluff the river to potentially get those combos to fold. And after playing 10 hours while stuck about 20,000, I'm in the mood to set up bluffs on the river. We won't get the opportunity though. The big blind check raises to 7,000. I'm not super surprised to see the opponent play back at us aggressively. That's what he's best at. He puts people in tough spots. We do have removal to Broadway, 2 pair, and a set of jacks, making it less likely that our opponent has a lot of those strong holdings. I can very credibly represent King-Queen because I'd played the same way. No, we won't get the opportunity to bluff the river. That's because we're doing it on the turn instead. I bluff shove for over $20,000, putting it all on the line. If the opponent has something strong, well, maybe we can get lucky to drill a queen on the river, double up, and get out of here with a win. We don't get snap called, which is a good sign. The opponent instead folds pretty quickly. We get our gutsiest play of the day through after 3-bet ripping the turn for piles. We had to show that one. This is a massive pot that comes our way. We get almost halfway out of the deficit in this hand alone. The opponent would later tell me that he had King-9 offsuit. He only had a gutter, so our pair was actually best. If you play back when the opponent folded, you can see his cards, and it looks like he was telling the truth about what he had. A half hour into the session, we're dealt King-Jack offsuit in the cutoff. It's a straddle pot. I raised to 30. The small blind calls, the big blind calls. We're going 3 ways to the flop in position. It comes King-7-3 with 2 hearts. We've got top pair and a decent kicker. It checks to me. There isn't too much to worry about other than the flush draw. Still, we can't just be giving tourists free cards on the strip. It's best to leave that to the escort service promoters. They're professionals. I bet 50. The small blind believes that's a fair price. He calls. The big blind folds. It's down to heads up. The turn is another king. We've got trips. Small blind checks. Since 3 kings are accounted for, it's much more likely that the opponent has a flush draw, a pair of 7s, or potentially has a pocket pair like 8s. In his mind, it's probably not likely that all of a hand as strong as the one I've got. I try to play into that by betting 140. It's a little on the larger side. That doesn't seem to bother the opponent. He calls again, and now I'm somewhat suspicious that he could have a king or maybe even a full house at this point. We don't need to worry too much because the river is the jack of hearts, giving us the absolute nuts. We make a backdoor full house. On top of that, the flush draw gets there. All the stars have aligned for us to win a huge pot. The small blind checks himself before he wrecks himself. This one's teed up for us. I get a running start, then bet 400 to Happy Gilmore it and drive it home. I should be able to get called by any other full house, a flush, trip kings, or maybe even a worse hand if the opponent doesn't believe me. The player is deep in the tank. He doesn't seem to want to let me have this one without putting up a fight. That's totally fine with me. Ultimately, he makes the call. We show him the best possible hand. It turns out that we needed the jack on the river because the opponent shows for the vlog that he had us absolutely dominated with ace-king.
Ooh, wow, that's sick.
I was expecting to maybe see king-queen, but since he didn't 3-bet pre-flop, I couldn't put him on big slick. This is a good example of how well I've been running lately. Even when everything appears to be set up for me to lose a big pot, I'll somehow get bailed out. Poker's a lot of fun when you're on the right side of coolers. When you're consistently on the wrong side, there isn't much that's worse. Next we've got King Jack offsuit on the button with a double straddle on. I raised to 125. The small blind has a hand that should normally be a 3-bet, but we already 4-bet jammed on him earlier in a button versus small blind situation, causing him to have to fold the best hand. We also 4-bet jammed pocket 7s that we just showed, so 3-betting me probably isn't too appealing. The small blind just calls. The elf defends his double straddle as we go 3 ways to the flop in position. It comes 10-7 deuce with 2 spades. We only have 2 overs and some backdoor draws. Checks to us. Let's try to take this one down without risking much. I bet 125. It's a quarter of the pot. If we get called, we can fire on plenty of turns if we pick up equity. Top pair isn't folding at this juncture. The small blind calls. The double straddler, who's cousins with the Keeblers, folds. It's down to heads up. The turn is the king of hearts, giving us top pair and a commanding lead. The small blind checks. Broadway cards are always going to be better for our range as the pre-flop aggressor, whether we actually connect or just pick up a straight draw with a hand like ace-queen or queen-jack. I'd continue firing with some of those straight or flush draw combos, so I need to do it when I actually have hands as well. I bet 450 for value. If we're up against 2 pair or better, we'll find out right now because we'll be getting check raised. Instead, the small blind just calls, indicating that our top pair is very likely best. The river is the 3 of diamonds. It's a total brick. Every single draw misses. The small blind checks. There's still a slight chance that we're losing to king queen of spades or clubs, but star command gives us permission to blast off. I bet 1100. It's a fairly large sizing that might look like a bluff, especially because normally if I'm betting on 3 streets, I'll have 2 pair or better a good percentage of the time, or I'll be bluffing. It's hard to have 2 pair, particularly from my opponent's perspective, when he has removal to 2 pair combos. The flush and straight draws missing should make it even more enticing for the small blind to call with second pair. Ultimately, he makes the correct fold and avoids losing a substantial amount. We win a medium-sized pot, but I'm still stuck several thousand that I'll need to get back before Andy realizes it's gone. A few minutes in, we've got King Jack offsuit in the small blind. Onto the gun and the button, both limp in for 5. I don't want to reopen the pot. I call for 3 more. The big blind checks this option. We're going 4 ways to the flop. It comes queen 10-5 with 2 clubs. We've got an open-ended straight draw with 1 over and a backdoor flush draw. In a limp pot, most players are going to have low cards that don't connect well with this board. I bet 10 to win this without having to make a pair. We run into a roadblock immediately as the big blind raises to 30. This opponent is named Chuck. He saw a few people taking photos with me earlier and asked who I was. Now that he knows I'm a YouTuber, he's coming for me hard. Under the gun and the button fold, I call for 20 more. We're heads up. The turn is the 8 of clubs. It's an interesting card because we pick out the king high flush draw, but we could be drawing stone dead. I check. The big blind isn't worried about the flush draw getting there. He bets 50. I definitely can't fold now. I call to see if we can improve. The river is the 9 of spades, giving us the 6 card straight. I'm not sure if we have the winning hand. What I do know is that if I check, I'll be inclined to call a bet. I don't want to check and allow worse hands than ours to check back. Instead, I bet 110. Perhaps we can still get called by 2 pair hands, a set of 5s, or by queen jack. If we get raised, we can be reasonably certain that the opponent has a flush and our straight's no good. The big blind calls. We show him our straight, not being entirely sure that we've got the winner. Chuck is a little slow to let go of his cards. He mucks though. We get almost 200 from him. Now he wants something from us.
Let's take a picture.
Yep. Do that.
This is probably the first time someone's ever lost a pot to me and immediately asked for a photo. It's pretty funny considering 2 minutes ago he had no idea who I was. But I'm always happy to take pictures with anyone who's interested. It's kind of a fun moment to capture for the vlog. We go on a 2-hour drought without anything interesting happening before we pick up King Jack offsuit in middle position. We were up $1,000 after the ace-queen suited hand, then lost $1,700, whiffing flops for 120 minutes. I added on for $700, so we're in for $3,700 at the moment, and we're stuck a little. I raised to 50. The hijack, cutoff, button, and big blind all call. We're going 5 ways to the flop. It comes jack 4 deuce rainbow. We've got top pair and a good kicker. The big blind checks. There's not much to be worried about other than the fact that we've got multiple opponents, so it wouldn't be shocking if someone had ace jack, pocket 4s or deuces, but we're probably best. I bet 110 to thin the field. The hijack folds quickly. The cutoff is less quick to make a decision. He has at least some piece. He calls. The button likes to heat things up. He puts in a raise to 450. It's surprising to see a raise because there aren't any 2-pair combos that make sense for the opponent to have. He shouldn't have called a pre-flop raise with Jack 4, Jack Deuce, or 4 Deuce. Also, if he had a set, he'd probably wait until the turn to raise since there aren't any major draws to be concerned about. This is a bizarre spot to be in, and I'm not totally buying the story that the button's telling. The best hand I imagine he'll have is Ace Jack or maybe Pocket Queens, but from what I've seen from the opponent so far this session, I'm almost positive that he would have 3-bet Pocket Queens pre-flop. The big blind folds, we can't go anywhere yet. I call for 340 more, suspecting that we could be up against an Ace-5 suited, 6-5 suited, or 5-4 suited type of hand. The cutoff folds, we're heads up out of position. The turn is the king of diamonds, we smash top 2 pair. If we're up against anything other than a set, we're in great shape. I check to the aggressor on the flop. He's not about to let up. He keeps the pressure on as he grabs chips and makes a huge bet of 1100. The button definitely isn't repping queens or ace jack anymore. Again, there aren't any flop 2-pair combos that make sense, so the opponent either has a set or he's bluffing. We don't want to pile more money in when we're behind, and we definitely want to keep his bluffs in if he's drawing dead to a gut shot straight draw or drilling trips. I call, we're probably good. There's no way to know for sure though. This has become a massive pot. The river is another deuce. It shouldn't have changed anything except it makes it less likely that we were up against the flop set. I check with plans to call a bet of almost any size. The button snap checks back. We show our top 2 pair. There's no way it's not good. The opponent sees that he's beat and returns his cards face down to the dealer. We win. I'm really curious to know what the opponent might have had though.
I have you the whole way? No?
Flop, I got 2-pair.
You had 2-pair? You had Jack 4?
I didn't think there was any way that we were going to be up against 2-pair on the flop. As soon as the session ends, I'm going to have to head to the post office to send Robbie a commission check. We win a big pot to be back up 1100 on the day after smashing a fortunate turn card. We're about 7 hours into it when I return to the table that I began the day at, and I have King Jack offsuit in the big blind. Under the gun +1 opens at 15, the small blind calls. He's a guy who just bluffed me out pocket kings with 4 deuce offsuit in a multi-way pot after calling my 3-bet pre-flop. I check folded when the flop came ace queen 6 and I had another player behind me. This video is getting long, so I didn't include it for the sake of brevity. People are doing strange things against me. Back to this hand, I call for 10 more. 3 of us see the flop. It's queen 9-3 rainbow. We all check. The turn is the 10 of diamonds. We've missed every draw we've had today, except here in the most inconsequential spot, we hit the most unlikely draw. The small blind bets 20. I don't want to raise him off his hand and win a tiny pot. I call to disguise my hand, keep the opponent's bluffs in, and go for the home run on the river if it's a blank. Under the gun +1 calls. I don't want to see a diamond come or C4 to the straight. Unfortunately, we C4, but it's the 4 of hearts. It's a complete blank. We still have the nuts. Small blind bets 75. This is a fun situation. I have a hand no one would expect me to fly the turn with against someone who just bluffed me. I raised to 300. Under the gun +1 folds. The small blind is going back and forth in his head about what he wants to do. There's a bit of a metagame that he could be leveling himself with. Finally, he comes to a decision.
Alright, because it's you, man. I'll give it to you.
We get the call and show the straight. We don't have the best session. At least we ended on a high note with a win of a sizable pot. A few minutes in, I switch to what appears to be a slightly better table where I'm dealt King Jack offsuit in middle position. I raise to 30. The cutoff, button, and big blind all call. We're going 4 ways to the flop. It comes ace 8-5 all clubs. We've got the king high flush draw. The big blind checks. I have a blocker to the nuts, a great draw, and an ace high board is also good for me as the pre-flop aggressor. I bet 70 as a semi-bluff. There's a small chance that I can win this immediately with a bet. If not, the pot will be larger for me in case I hit my draw, and I can actually keep firing as a bluff on future streets if I want. The cutoff calls, the button folds, the big blind calls. It's down to 3 of us. The turn is the 3 of clubs. We've got the nuts and a multi-way pot. The big blind checks. I'm hoping at least one of my opponents has the queen, jack, or 10 of clubs and will be willing to stick around. I bet 140 to target those hands. The cutoff does his best impression of a batter facing Randy Johnson in the 90s, and he gets out. The big blind is a different story. His is one of future pain and tragedy. He calls, likely drawing dead unless he has a set or 2 pair. It's heads up. The river is the 6 of hearts. It's a blank, allowing us to maintain the best possible hand. The big blind checks. He likely won't call a 3rd barrel without having a Broadway club. I could bet a large amount to target the queen. Instead, I bet 360 to give myself a better chance getting called by a slightly wider range of hands. The big blind knows what I'm representing, isn't happy about it, but still calls immediately while eloquently expressing himself.
Fuck, I got the queen. God damn it. Nice hand.
The opponent isn't feeling great because he loses a sizable pot. I'm glad to be on my side of the cooler. I just can't help but feel like I missed out on some value. I certainly would have made it more if I knew for sure what we were up against. I go to a new table that gets drawn for a splash pot promotion in which $100 is added to 5 consecutive pots. I lose the first 4, then pick up King Jack offsuit on the last one, under the gun straddles, under the gun plus 1 limps in for 10. I'm coming after him and the additional money in the middle. I raise to 60. If everyone folds, that'd be great. Small blind wants a piece, he calls, the big blind calls, the under the gun straddler calls, under the gun plus 1 also calls. We go 5 ways to the flop. There's a big pot already. The dealer is the best. He puts out Jack, Jack 6 with 2 clubs. We have trip jacks. It's rare to have a multi-way pot this large on the flop and just smash it like this. Small blind and big blind both check. Under the gun announces a bet of 200. He's currently my second favorite person on the planet, right next to the dealer. Under the gun plus 1 folds, it's on me. I've got 585 total. No need to get tricky. I rip it. All in?
I'm in.
Small blind folds. The big blind lets his cards go. I expected to get snap called by the under the gun player, but that doesn't happen. It's only 385 more for him to call. With almost 1200 he can win in the middle. He ultimately lays it down. I'm happy with that outcome and show him that I have the goods. A large pot is pushed towards us. Then I pick up King Jack offsuit under the gun plus 2 and there's a $50 double straddle on. I'm first to act and I open to 150. Under the gun calls, under the gun plus 1 calls for 100 more. That's DQ. We're going 3 ways to the flop. It's ace queen 10 with 2 hearts. We flop the nuts. If we listen closely, we hear DQ commentate for us, so I don't have to.
Brad's taking a hand that he hopes to win.
Very much.
DQ hasn't looked, but he will check. What will Brad do next?
200.
He's going to bet 200 in total. If no one has a heart, DQ's going to look at 1 card first and call. And then DQ's going to check.
Heads up, check there.
Oh no.
400.
How much?
400.
DQ's going to check a second card and he's going to call again. Wow. And DQ's going to check again.
1,000.
1,000? Wow, you guys huge man. Because he just put it on the video. Did you turn the nut flush? Oh, I missed that. You did. You turned the nut flush. I folded. I folded.
Did not turn it up flush. Flop.
Flopped it.
Nice fold, man. Nice fold.
I'd get completely out of the hole. I've got a lot of chips in front of me, but I'm in for most of it. If you thought that last hand was wild, this one's even crazier. We've got King Jack offsuit in the big blind, 5 players limp in. I check, 6 of us see the flop, it's 10-9-4 with 2 diamonds, we have a gutter with 2 overs. Small blind checks, I check, under the gun checks, middle position player bets 10. The cutoff folds, the button and small blind call, I figure it's only $10, I call as well. The under the gun player calls, 5 of us see the turn, it's the queen of hearts, we have the nuts again in a multi-way pot. Small blind checks, I check, this time under the gun bets 25. The middle position player folds, the button calls, small blind folds, it's on me, I raise to 100. Under the gun calls, he has the second largest stack at the table with 2,200 left, I have him covered, the button folds, we're heads up, there are a ton of cards that I don't want to see, including any heart, diamond, king, queen, jack 10, 9, 8, or 4. Somehow we fade all of them, the river is the 5 of spades, we still have the best possible hand. The question now is how can we make the most money? I get tricky and I bet 100 again. I want my opponent to think that this is a blocker bet. If he has something strong, then he'll raise for value. If he has something weak, like a missed draw, then he may see this as an opportunity to steal the pot by coming over the top and raising. I don't expect my opponent to flat very often. The player seemingly takes the bait and raises to 325. This is a really fun spot to be in when you've got the nuts and your opponent is raising you on the river. He didn't re-raise me on the turn. For that reason, it's tough to imagine that we're chopping. Maybe he has a set or jack 8 for a lower straight and can call a re-raise. I make it 800. Under the gun announces that he's all in for 2,200 total. I call. Turns out we are chopping. He has king jack as well. Not the ideal outcome. Still gets the blood flowing when you play a pot that's almost $5,000 in a 1-3 game. Next we've got king jack offsuit on the button in a straddle pot. I raised to 30. Small blind calls. The under the gun straddler calls. We're going 3 ways to the flop in position. It comes jack 10-6 all spades. We've got top pair and the king high flush draw to go along with it. Checks to me. Note that this is really the exact opposite situation as when we had pocket jacks on the 10 high board. There are tons of cards that can help us improve on the turn and river here, including any spade, jack, or king. Because of that, I'm not worried about giving my opponents a free card. Maserati's in the small blind. I'd like to give him a chance to bluff at it. I put in a sneaky check back to feign weakness. The turn is the 3 of clubs. It's a blank. There's no bite from Maserati. he checks. Under the gun puts in a nice bet of 60 though. Maybe he flopped a flush, maybe he's taking a stab at it as a bluff. To avoid putting in extra money if we're beat and to keep the opponent's bluffs in, I call the 60 rather than raise. The small blind folds, it's down to heads up. The river is the king of diamonds giving us 2 pair. It's a good card for us. Still, I'm not 100% sure we've got the best hand even as the opponent checks. We could be up against a set or a small flush or even the ace high flush, and the opponent could reasonably check for pot control or to give us a chance to bluff at it if he puts us on a flush draw that didn't get there on the river. Our hand is too good to check back. I bet 150 in case the under the gun player has a worse 2 pair, something like king queen, maybe even a pair of jacks that he wants to bluff catch us with. Under the gun thinks better at calling. He folds what he'd later say is a pair of jacks. Our tricky check on the flop at least partially backfired. The river seemed good, but also made it tougher for us to get paid by second pair. Still, it's a decent outcome for us. With this win, we're up 600. We haven't made the first pay jump, but we can't wait any longer as we pick up king jack offsuit and hijack with 8.5 big blinds. I jam for 515,000. Chewy's in the small blind with a big stack. He calls, which I didn't want to see. Just winning the blinds would have been huge. The big blind is in the tank, considering whether or not he should also call or possibly re-raise. Each second feels like an eternity. We could be in terrible shape, but either way, our tournament life is on the line. It's just a matter of whether we're going to be heads up or if this is going to be a 3-way all-in. The big blind finally folds. We get some bad news.
King queen, that's like the worst thing I could have heard. Fuck.
We're all in and completely dominated. It's going to be tough for us to win this one with only 1 live card.
Jack one time.
The flop comes king 4-4. We don't hit the jack, but we at least have a lot of outs that can give us the win or a chop. Plus, we have a main event champion in our corner rooting for us to stay alive.
There's ace. Ace or jack. 4. Ace jack and 4.
We're down to 1 final card. We need to drill a miracle, otherwise our tournament runs over. If we only had a club in our hand, I'd feel a lot better about the situation because we'd have 9 additional outs. Instead, I'm doing my best to will an ace, jack, or 4 so that we can stay in the tournament. We disappointingly don't hit any of those cards.
Wow. I did not think a king was going to be coming.
We get the last king in the deck to chop in the most unexpected way. Though we end up only increasing our stack by 1 big blind, it feels like a double up as we continue to hang on by a thread. Perhaps there's something to this level of the short stacks mantra that Kata keeps on repeating. Chewy takes the tough chop in stride.
You don't mind Brad sticking around.
I appreciate it.